Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Texas town. While her friends played with dolls, she was bandaging her dog's scraped paw or helping her grandmother with her medications. Her mother often joked that Sarah was born with healing hands, but Sarah knew it was more than that. She genuinely cared about people who were hurting. Growing up in a military family, Sarah heard stories about brave soldiers who risked everything to save their teammates. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, would tell her tales of medics who ran into dangerous situations to help wounded soldiers. These stories planted a seed in her young mind that would grow into something extraordinary. When Sarah turned 18, she shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to join the Navy. Not just any job in the Navy, but she wanted to become a hospital corpsman assigned to the Marines. Her parents were worried. They knew this meant she could end up in combat zones, far from the safety they wanted for their daughter. But Sarah's mind was made up. She wanted to be the person who could make a difference when others were in their darkest moments. Basic training was harder than Sarah had imagined. The physical demands pushed her small frame to its limits. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds, she was often the smallest person in her unit. Some instructors doubted whether she had what it took to succeed in such a demanding field. Sarah proved them wrong through sheer determination and an unbreakable spirit. During medical training, Sarah excelled. She had a natural talent for staying calm under pressure and making quick decisions. Her instructors noticed that she could work efficiently even when chaos surrounded her. More importantly, she had something that couldn't be taught: genuine compassion for every person she treated, no matter the situation. After completing her training, Sarah received orders that would change her life forever. She was being assigned to a Marine Special Operations unit that would deploy to Afghanistan. The unit was made up of highly trained SEALs who conducted dangerous missions in enemy territory. Sarah would be their only medical support, responsible for keeping these elite warriors alive in the most dangerous situations imaginable. The other members of the unit weren't sure what to think about their new medic. They had requested someone with combat experience. And instead, they got a young woman who looked like she should be in college rather than a war zone. Their team leader, Sergeant First Class Mike Johnson, was particularly skeptical. He had seen too many good soldiers get hurt because their medic wasn't ready for the reality of combat. Sarah understood their doubts, but she was determined to prove herself through actions rather than words. She spent extra hours studying combat medicine, learning everything she could about treating wounds in hostile environments. She practiced her skills until they became second nature, knowing that in a real emergency, there wouldn't be time to think about what to do next. The team deployed to Afghanistan in the spring, arriving at a forward operating base in one of the most dangerous regions of the country. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with rocky mountains and deep valleys that provided perfect hiding spots for enemy fighters. Sarah had never been anywhere so far from home, but she tried not to let her nervousness show. Their first few missions were routine patrols that allowed Sarah to get used to operating in a combat environment. She learned how to move quietly, how to stay alert for danger, and how to work as part of a team. The SEALs began to warm up to her as they saw her dedication and professionalism. She never complained about the difficult conditions, and always put the needs of her teammates first. 3 weeks into their deployment, everything changed. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a remote village in the mountains. The mission would be dangerous, requiring the team to travel through territory known to be heavily defended by enemy fighters. Sarah felt her stomach tighten when she heard the briefing, but she kept her concerns to herself. The night before the mission, Sergeant Johnson pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. He told her that this mission would be different from anything they had done before. The enemy was well-armed and highly motivated, and there was a real possibility that someone could get seriously hurt. He wanted to make sure she was ready for what might happen. Sarah looked him straight in the eye and told him she was ready. She had trained for this moment her entire military career, and she wouldn't let her team down. Johnson nodded, finally convinced that their young medic had the courage and determination needed for what lay ahead. As the team prepared their equipment and went over the mission plan one final time, Sarah checked and double-checked her medical supplies. She organized everything so she could find what she needed, even in complete darkness. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing with anticipation of what the next day might bring. None of them knew that within 24 hours, Sarah would face the most challenging moment of her life. A moment that would test everything she had learned and push her beyond what anyone thought possible. The quiet young woman from Texas was about to become a hero, though she would never think of herself that way. The helicopter dropped them off 3 miles from the target village just before dawn. Sarah felt the familiar weight of her medical pack as she adjusted the straps across her shoulders. The pack contained everything she might need to save a life: bandages, medications, surgical instruments, and blood products. It weighed nearly 40 pounds, but Sarah had trained with it so much that it felt like part of her body. The team moved silently through the rocky terrain as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Sarah stayed in the middle of the formation, as she had been taught, where she would be protected, but could quickly reach anyone who needed medical attention. The landscape was beautiful in the early morning light, but Sarah knew that beauty could hide deadly danger. Their target was a compound where intelligence suggested an important enemy leader was hiding. The plan was to approach the village carefully, gather information, and then either capture or eliminate the target. It seemed straightforward, but Sarah had learned that nothing in combat ever went exactly according to plan. As they got closer to the village, Sergeant Johnson signaled for the team to stop. Through his binoculars, he could see more activity than expected. There were armed guards posted around the compound, and what looked like fighting positions prepared in advance. The enemy was ready for them. The team leader made a difficult decision. They had come too far to turn back now, and the intelligence they had received indicated this target was too important to let escape. They would proceed with the mission, but everyone needed to be extra careful. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized they were walking into a trap. They moved closer to the village, using rocks and low walls for cover. Sarah could see the compound now, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by high walls. It looked peaceful enough, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. Her training had taught her to always expect the unexpected. The first shots came without warning. One moment the team was quietly approaching their target, and the next moment bullets were flying everywhere. Sarah heard the sharp crack of rifle fire and the whistle of bullets passing overhead. She immediately dropped to the ground behind a large rock, her heart pounding in her chest. Sergeant Johnson was shouting orders, trying to coordinate the team's response to the ambush. The SEALs returned fire with professional precision, but they were outnumbered and caught in the open. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of heavy machine gun fire from multiple positions around the village. They had walked into a carefully planned trap. The fighting was intense and chaotic. Sarah kept her head down as bullets struck the rocks around her hiding position. She could hear her teammates calling out positions of enemy fighters and coordinating their movements. Despite the danger, their training took over, and they began to fight their way toward better cover. Then, Sarah heard the sound that every medic dreads: someone calling for help. Through the noise of gunfire, she heard Corporal Davis shouting that he was hit. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Her fear disappeared, replaced by the calm focus she had developed during countless hours of practice. Someone needed her help, and nothing else mattered. Sarah looked around the battlefield, trying to locate Davis. She spotted him about 30 yards away, lying behind a low stone wall. Even from a distance, she could see blood on his uniform. He was trying to return fire, but his movements were slow and unsteady. Sarah knew she had to reach him quickly. The space between Sarah and Davis was completely exposed to enemy fire. There was no cover, just open ground swept by multiple machine gun positions. Any reasonable person would have waited for the fighting to die down before attempting such a dangerous rescue. But Sarah wasn't thinking about being reasonable. She was thinking about saving a life. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her medical pack and sprinted toward Davis. Bullets struck the ground around her feet as she ran, kicking up small explosions of dirt and rock chips. She could hear the angry buzz of bullets passing close to her head, but she kept running. Her only thought was reaching her wounded teammate. She dove behind the wall next to Davis just as a burst of machine gun fire struck where she had been standing a second before. Davis looked at her with surprise and relief. He had been hit in the leg and was losing blood quickly. Sarah immediately went to work. applying pressure to the wound and preparing to treat the injury properly. As Sarah worked on Davis, she heard more shouts from other positions. 2 more members of the team had been hit by enemy fire. Martinez and Thompson were both down, and their teammates were calling desperately for medical assistance. Sarah realized with growing horror that 3 of her team members were seriously wounded, and she was the only person who could help them. The enemy fire was too intense for anyone else to move safely across the battlefield. The remaining SEALs were pinned down in defensive positions, unable to reach their wounded teammates without exposing themselves to certain death. Sarah looked at the situation and understood that she was the only hope these men had. Davis grabbed her arm as she prepared to leave his position. He told her it was too dangerous, that she should wait for support or for the enemy fire to decrease. Sarah looked into his eyes and told him quietly that she couldn't let the others die when she had the ability to save them. She had made a promise when she became a medic, and she intended to keep it no matter what the cost. Sarah checked her medical supplies one more time and prepared for what would be the longest and most dangerous journey of her life. She had to cross that deadly ground 2 more times, reaching each wounded SEAL and somehow getting them all to safety. Everyone who saw the battlefield that day believed it was an impossible task. Sarah took a deep breath and sprinted toward Martinez's position. The enemy had spotted her movement and concentrated their fire on her small, running figure. Bullets struck the ground all around her, some so close that she could feel the heat as they passed by. She ran in a zigzag pattern, using every technique she had learned to make herself a harder target to hit. Martinez was in bad shape when Sarah reached him. He had taken a bullet to the chest and was struggling to breathe. Sarah could see that he was going into shock from blood loss and pain. She worked quickly, applying emergency treatment to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition. All around them, bullets continued to fly as the battle raged on. As Sarah worked on Martinez, she noticed something that made her heart sink. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves so that they could see the entire area where the wounded SEALs were located. They were deliberately targeting anyone who tried to move, creating what soldiers call a kill zone. Getting one wounded man to safety would be nearly impossible. Getting all 3 seemed beyond human capability. But Sarah had never been one to give up when lives were at stake. She managed to get Martinez conscious enough to help with his own movement. Together, they began the dangerous journey back toward the rest of the team. Sarah supported most of Martinez's weight while he tried to keep his rifle ready in case they encountered enemy fighters up close. The trip back took forever. Every few yards, they had to stop and take cover as machine gun fire swept over their position. Sarah could feel Martinez getting weaker, and she knew he wouldn't survive much longer without proper medical treatment. She pushed herself harder, half carrying her wounded teammate across the rocky ground. When they finally reached the safety of the team's defensive position, Sarah had barely caught her breath before she was planning her next rescue mission. Thompson was still out there, and his condition was unknown. The other SEALs tried to talk her out of making another trip across the kill zone. They had seen how intense the enemy fire was, and they didn't believe anyone could survive crossing that ground again. Sarah checked her ammunition and medical supplies. She was running low on some critical items, but she still had enough to treat Thompson's wounds if she could reach him. She looked at her teammates and told them she was going back. Nothing they said would change her mind. The second rescue was even more dangerous than the first. The enemy had learned to anticipate her movements and were ready when she broke cover. Sarah had to crawl part of the way, moving slowly to avoid detection. When machine gun fire forced her to stop, she pressed herself against the ground so tightly that she could taste dirt. Thompson was unconscious when Sarah found him. He had been hit multiple times and had lost a tremendous amount of blood. Sarah knew immediately that his injuries were the most serious of all 3 wounded men. She had to work faster and more efficiently than ever before if she wanted to save his life. Working under fire, Sarah applied emergency treatment to Thompson's wounds. She started an IV to replace lost fluids and gave him medication to help with shock and pain. All the time, bullets were striking the rocks around their position. Sarah blocked out the noise and focused entirely on her patient, using skills that had become automatic through countless hours of training. Getting Thompson to safety required a different approach. He was too badly injured to help with his own movement, so Sarah would have to carry him the entire distance. At 120 pounds, Sarah was smaller than any of the men she was trying to save. Thompson weighed nearly twice as much as she did. But Sarah was determined to find a way. She got Thompson onto her back in a fireman's carry and began the most difficult journey of her life. Every step was a struggle against his weight and her own exhaustion. The enemy fire seemed to intensify as they realized what she was attempting. Sarah could hear bullets striking the ground just inches from her feet as she struggled forward. Halfway back to safety, Sarah's legs nearly gave out from exhaustion. She had been running on adrenaline for what felt like hours, and her body was reaching its limits. For a moment, she considered stopping to rest, but she knew that would mean certain death for both of them. She forced herself to keep moving, one painful step at a time. The other SEALs provided covering fire as Sarah approached their position, but their ammunition was running low. They had been in the firefight for hours, and their supplies were nearly exhausted. Sarah knew that she would have to make one more trip across the kill zone, and this time there might not be enough covering fire to protect her. Davis was still where Sarah had left him, but his condition had worsened during the time she had been rescuing the others. The makeshift bandages Sarah had applied were soaked with blood, and he was barely conscious. Sarah realized that all her previous efforts would be wasted if she couldn't get Davis to proper medical care immediately. This final rescue was the most desperate of all. Sarah was physically and emotionally exhausted. Her medical supplies were nearly gone, and the enemy fire hadn't decreased at all, but she had come too far to quit now. She had made a promise to bring all her teammates home safely, and she intended to keep that promise. Sarah managed to get Davis moving under his own power, but he needed constant support. Together, they made their way across the battlefield one last time. The journey seemed endless, with every step bringing new dangers and challenges, but Sarah's determination never wavered. When they finally reached safety, Sarah collapsed from exhaustion. She had spent hours under intense enemy fire, making multiple trips across a kill zone that military experts would later describe as unsurvivable. She had treated 3 seriously wounded men and carried them all to safety through her own courage and determination. The evacuation helicopter arrived shortly after Sarah completed her final rescue. All 3 wounded SEALs survived their injuries and eventually returned to duty. Military investigators later determined that Sarah had faced fire from more than 20 enemy positions during her rescue efforts. The fact that she survived was considered miraculous. Sarah never considered herself a hero. To her, she had simply done her job as a medic. She had taken an oath to preserve life, and she had fulfilled that obligation regardless of the personal cost. Her teammates knew better. They had witnessed something extraordinary that day, something that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. The small-town girl from Texas had proven that true heroism isn't about size or strength. It's about having the courage to do what's right when everything around you is falling apart. Sarah Martinez had shown that one person, armed with determination and compassion, could make all the difference in the world.